The moment the cafe door opened, a cold gust swept across the room, but it wasn't the wind that made people turn their heads. It was her, a young woman with trembling hands, clutching a worn folder to her chest like it held the last piece of her dignity. She moved quietly, almost apologetically, as if she didn't want to disturb the world around her. And yet she did. Something about her presence made the air tighten, like everyone sensed she was fighting a battle no one could see. At a corner table, a man paused mid-sip. A single father, mid-30s, dressed simply but neatly, with the kind of tired eyes that belonged to someone who'd been carrying more than his share of life's weight. His 6-year-old daughter sat across from him, swinging her legs, coloring with fierce concentration. He had promised her this cafe morning, a small ritual they shared whenever life allowed. But now, his focus shifted. He couldn't help noticing the girl near the counter, the way her fingers tremored as she tried to pull out her wallet, the way her shoulders tensed when the barista asked a simple question. He watched for only a moment, but that moment changed everything. The woman's hands shook so badly she dropped her credit card. It clattered to the floor. She froze. Her breathing quickened, her throat tightened, and though she wasn't crying, something broke quietly inside her. She bent to pick it up, but her trembling made her miss it again and again. People stared. No one moved. The single dad did. He stood, walked toward her, and knelt beside the fallen card. His voice was gentle, barely above a whisper, but steady enough to anchor her storm. She didn't speak. She didn't even look up at him. She just let him hand her the card, her trembling fingers brushing his, a silent apology trembling in the space between them. She couldn't know that this small encounter would unravel a chain of moments that would change her life, and his. The woman took a seat near the window, far from everyone, clutching the card like it might disappear again. Her coffee arrived a few minutes later, but she didn't touch it. She simply stared outside, her eyes distant, unfocused, full of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. The single dad returned to his daughter, but his mind wasn't fully there anymore. He kept glancing back at the girl by the window, sensing something was deeply wrong. He recognized the look. He'd worn it himself, years ago, when his world collapsed overnight and left him raising a child alone, learning to rebuild himself piece by fragile piece. His daughter tugged his sleeve. She had noticed too. She leaned closer and whispered, asking why that girl was sad. He told her the truth. Sometimes grown-ups hurt quietly, in ways they don't know how to explain. His daughter nodded, like she understood more than children usually should. Minutes passed. The girl by the window still hadn't touched her coffee. At one point, she lifted the cup, and her hands shook so violently she had to set it down. A tear slipped onto the table. She didn't wipe it away. That was the moment the father made his decision. He rose slowly, walked over, and asked if she was waiting for someone. She hesitated, unsure if she should respond. But the gentleness in his eyes dissolved her defenses. She told him no, she wasn't waiting for anyone. She had no one left to wait for. He asked if she needed help. She said she was fine. But her voice broke halfway through the lie. He didn't push. Instead, he asked if she would like company, not out of pity, but because the table felt too empty for someone carrying so much. She stared at him. No one had spoken to her like that in months. She nodded, barely. He invited her to join him and his daughter. She refused at first. She didn't want to disturb them. She didn't want anyone seeing her like this. But his daughter, with her bright innocence and tiny hand reaching out, insisted. And so the trembling woman sat with a single father and his little girl, not knowing that the warmth at that table would become the first light she had seen in a long time. Her name was Lila, his was Marcus. As they talked, slowly, gently, step by hesitant step, more of her story unfolded in pieces she didn't mean to reveal. She had recently lost her job, her apartment, her friends had drifted away when her panic attacks grew worse. Her parents were gone. The folder she carried held rejection letters, unpaid bills, and notices with red stamps that made her feel like she was drowning. She was at the cafe that morning because she had one final job interview scheduled nearby. But the moment she walked in, her anxiety overwhelmed her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She confessed she was thinking of canceling the interview altogether. Marcus listened without judgment. He didn't offer cliches or empty reassurances. He simply listened, something no one had done for her in a long time. He understood struggle. He understood fear. After losing his wife in an accident, he had spent months in a fog, raising a child while battling grief and guilt that felt too heavy for one person. He had been lost, trembling in his own way. But he had survived, and now he was sitting here, looking at someone else drowning in the same darkness he once knew intimately. He told her something simple, something sincere, that the world wasn't done with her yet. His daughter added that she liked Lila's voice, even if it shook. She said it sounded like someone who was trying very hard to be brave. And that made her a hero in her book. Lila cried for real then. Not the silent tears she had been swallowing, but raw ones that came from a place deep inside, from wounds she never allowed to surface. The cafe grew quieter. People watched. But this time, instead of judgment, there was softness in their eyes, because kindness is contagious when done without hesitation. Marcus offered to sit with her until her interview time came. She accepted. For the first time that week, she drank her coffee without spilling. Her hands still trembled, but slightly less. When it was time to leave, she stood, suddenly overwhelmed again. Marcus looked at her and said she could do it. His daughter gave her a tiny origami star she had folded from a napkin. For luck, she said. Lila whispered thank you, holding it like something precious. She left the cafe. She didn't come back for 3 hours. When the door finally opened again, Marcus looked up. His daughter gasped. Lila stood in the doorway, her eyes red, but brighter. Her posture was different, not confident, not fully, but steadier. She walked toward them, each step a quiet victory. She told them she hadn't gotten the job. But the company was impressed with her resilience. They gave her 2 more interviews to try again. They said they saw potential. And that small flicker of hope, more than the job itself, was enough to lift her for the first time in months. Marcus congratulated her genuinely. His daughter hugged her. Lila held the napkin star tightly. They talked until the sun began to set. When they finally said goodbye, she thanked Marcus again. Not just for sitting with her, but for seeing her when she felt invisible. That night, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about her. And Lila couldn't stop thinking about the man who had reached out without expecting anything in return. Days passed, then weeks, and something unexpected began to grow, slowly, gently, cautiously, like a flower pushing through cracked pavement. They kept meeting at the cafe, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for a few minutes on Lila's way to interviews or temporary shifts she picked up to survive. Marcus's daughter adored her. She would show her drawings and share little stories, and Lila, who once felt like a burden in every room, suddenly felt wanted. Valued, seen. Their bond deepened not because of grand gestures, but because of small, consistent kindnesses, checking in, listening, celebrating tiny victories, reminding each other that healing wasn't linear but worth every step. One afternoon, Lila came in with a different energy. She sat down, hands still trembling slightly, but her smile was real. She had been hired, not the first company, but another, one that loved her dedication, her honesty, the way she kept showing up despite everything weighing her down. She would start next Monday. A stable job, a decent salary, a fresh beginning. Marcus hugged her, proud in a way he hadn't felt in years. His daughter announced it felt like a holiday. Life didn't magically become perfect. Lila still had moments when her anxiety spiked. There were nights she cried for reasons she couldn't explain. But now she had people, 2 of them, who didn't let her face the darkness alone. And she, in turn, brought warmth into their lives that neither of them realized they had been missing. Months passed, seasons changed, and somewhere along the way, friendship quietly evolved into something deeper. Something unspoken yet unmistakable. Marcus found himself waiting for her messages. Lila found herself laughing again, letting herself be vulnerable around a man who never rushed her healing. The cafe where they met became their sanctuary. A place where trembling hands first found comfort, where broken pieces slowly aligned into something whole. One rainy evening, as they sat in their familiar corner, Lila looked out the window, watching droplets race down the glass. She confessed that she still had bad days, days when fear tried to convince her she wasn't enough. Marcus told her he had bad days too. Everyone did. The important part wasn't being fearless, it was choosing to keep moving, even with shaking hands. She reached across the table. Her hand trembled, but she didn't pull away. Marcus placed his hand over hers, steadying it just like he had the first day, but this time, not as 2 strangers, but as 2 people whose lives had intertwined in the most unexpected, beautiful way. Lila whispered that she was scared. Marcus whispered that he was too. But then he added something she would never forget. that the best things in life often begin with fear, with vulnerability, with courage that feels too small